As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I was recently invited to speak at a conference, and then they assigned me the passage to speak on. It was a passage in the Gospel of John in chapter 17. It's the Lord's Prayer. It's the one he prayed, not the one he taught us to pray. And then they asked me to speak on the theme of unity, which I did. And then they told me, but now of course you need to cover the whole chapter. And I think I mentioned, I then ended up preaching it here as well as there. And I talked about the fact that a Puritan in, I think it was the 17th century, preached 45 sermons on that one chapter. And a London pastor in the 19th century wrote a book on it, and it was 450 pages. So I mentioned there was no way I could cover everything in the chapter, but I managed to hit the high points and keep it within, I think, about 45 minutes. I was so impressed. Well, I knew that I wasn't going to explain all the details, and that sure enough, somebody would ask me about some detail in that passage that I didn't have time to cover, and that is exactly what happened. Matter of fact, it wasn't anybody in the congregation. It was somebody in that heard the message on the internet and sent me an email and said, I wish you'd have covered more details. And I thought about that, and there is one detail in the passage I thought it might be worth backing up and covering. Very common concept, but one I think is not always understood, or I might say misunderstood. What I have in mind is in the middle of that passage, Jesus says several times, they are in the world. But then he says they are not of the world. And of course, he's talking about the disciples as well as us. As a matter of fact, he's even talking about himself. So it is possible on the one hand to be in the world, and on the other hand, not be of the world. Now, what does that mean? I mean, very specifically, what does that look like? So that's what I'd like to talk about today. I'm going to start out by defining the word world as it's used in the New Testament. Then I would like to give a rather detailed description of what is in the world and what it means to be of the world. And then I would like to talk about the danger of all of that. So first, let's begin just with the definition. The Greek word translated world, it's cosmos. I think it's the word from which we get cosmetics, is it not? You know what that word means? It means to put in order. I wonder if that's how they got cosmetics. That a woman puts her face in order. Is that possible? At any rate, that's the Greek word is cosmos. It also means the population of the world. So on the one hand, it's talking about the material universe, and on the second place, it's talking about people on the planet. So that the Bible says in John chapter 1, Jesus was in the world, meaning he was on the planet Earth. And then a couple of chapters later, it says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And of course, that's not talking about the planet, it's talking about the people on it. And then the third definition of that word is that it refers to a system. Maybe that's where we get cosmetics. At any rate, it refers to an orderly system. Now, that's the meaning of the word, but there's more. I want you to turn with me to 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2. This is one of the most famous passages, well-known passages on the subject of the world in all of the Bible. John says in verse 15, love not the world or the things that are in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. All right? What is critical to notice is this. He says, don't love the world or the things in it. I'll speak more about that in a second. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father. Now that's a phrase we need to concentrate on for a second. It should be translated love for the Father, not love of the Father. This is not God's love, it's our love for the Father. So if you love the world, which he's telling you you should not do, the love of the Father is not in you. Now that doesn't mean you aren't saved. It doesn't say the love of God or the love for God. It says the love of the Father, which indicates he's talking about God's children. So it's possible to be God's child on the one hand and not have the love of God abiding, dwelling down, being at home in you, which is one of John's favorite terms in this passage of Scripture. The idea is this, that if you love the world, love for the Father is not the controlling factor of your life. It's not that you don't love the Father at all. It's that the love of the Father is not controlling you and determining what you do. To love the world, then, is to venerate and value, to cherish and to choose that which is in the world. But now one other observation is this. He says, don't love the world, because if you love the world, love for the Father is not controlling you, not determining what you do. Then that implies, matter of fact, it does more than imply, it's there, that these two things are mutually exclusive. That if you love the world, then you're leaving God out. Matter of fact, that's sort of the bottom line. If I could say it all very simply, the world is a system that leaves God out. That's the world. And when you love the world, you are leaving God out. Now, that's the definition. It's leaving God out. It's a system that leaves God out. What I want to do is describe that system in great, minute detail. There's all kinds of worlds out there, illustrated by the Los Angeles Times. I have in my hand the front page of the Los Angeles Times, yesterday's edition. You know what they put on the front page? Generally, the political world. You want to know about the political world? You read the front page. Now, the political world is divided into the federal government, international governments, state government, and local governments. If you're reading one of the major newspapers in the United States, they generally put the international and national news on the front page. Matter of fact, if you read this front section, you'll find out that it's really dealing with national and international news. Here's something about South Africa leaves global court. Talks about the Islamic State. Here's a Filipino leader backs off U.S. remarks. It's all international, it's national, but it's all political. Now they tend, in the Times and in the other major newspapers, they tend to put the state and local news in another section. So here's the California section. So if you're reading the Times and you want to know about the state government, you got to read another section. Now, something local can land on the front page if it's big enough, like the Dodgers losing yesterday. I suspect that's on the front page today. Now, local papers, more local papers, actually do the reverse. They will put the local news on the front page, and they'll put the national news in the back somewhere. But here's what I want to get at. What is the political world all about? If you could pick one word and say, this is what it's about, what would you say? Power. That is exactly the word I would have chosen. Good for you, or me. All right, there's more. Here's the business section. Now, this one's easy. This is the business world. Okay? So, if I were going to say pick one word that describes the business world, what would you say it is? Money. Very good. You get an A. It's all about profit, right? So the bottom line of business is the bottom line. We got to make money. So you ask any business owner and he will tell you, if we don't make profit, we're out of business. Now you can divide that world into the big business, small business, stock market. There are different aspects, but it's all the business world. So what we've got is the political world, and it's after power. And we've got the business world, and it's after profit or money. Shall we keep going? Yeah. There's more sections to the paper. You get an A. All right. Let's talk about I'm not sure I want to do this. I'm a Dodger fan. Let's talk about the sports page. Now, in the sports world, what's the issue? Winning. Right. It's all about winning. That is what the sports world is all about. Now, have you ever heard that? I mean, they're different. Let me first say, there's all kinds of sports. I mean, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, tennis, golf. Did I leave yours out? All right, but you get the idea. And there's an old adage that goes something like this. It says, it's not whether you win or lose, it's whether you play the game. You ever heard of that? Well, let me just tell you, that's not the way it is. And if you doubt that, just go play. And they don't get to the end of the game and say, you played nicely. You played well. They want to know one thing. Did you win? And if you doubt what I'm saying because you haven't played, I can tell you how you can prove what I'm saying. Go to any athletic event where parents have involved their children. And don't look at the children. Look at the parents. You know what the parents believe? That sports is all about winning. We gotta win. So that's the sports world. Now what I'm trying to give you a flavor of is just the issue in each of these worlds. Shall we keep going? Yes. There's more to the paper. There is the entertainment world. Now, the Los Angeles Times calls this calendar, but don't let that fool you because this is all about entertainment. Matter of fact, it's got all the movies in here and, you know, which movie is making it and which isn't, and you can pick the one you want to go to. It's all about entertainment. Now, what's the issue in entertainment? That one's a little tougher, isn't it? Fun. You go to be entertained. So, could I use... Diversion. Yeah, diversion. Yeah, okay. That's to get you away from the other worlds, but it does that. But what's the issue? What is it we are looking for? Can I use the word fun? Okay. How about the word pleasure? You go that to enjoy, you know? I'm out of paper, but I'm not out of worlds. How about the academic world? That gets mentioned. The paper doesn't have a special section for it, but it gets mentioned. Let me tell you about the academic world. And I think maybe we could throw the scientific world in the same lump there. Let me tell you about the academic world. Oh boy. In my opinion, There is more pride per square inch in the academic world than any world I've ever been associated with. And if you don't believe that, go take a class and try to tell the professor he's wrong. I mean, it's terrible. It's, you know. Now, we can go on and on and on. Like, there's the legal world. Matter of fact, that one really interests me because I used to want to be an attorney. Somewhere along the line, about 13, I decided that I was going to be an attorney. And I became a Christian when I was 18. And for the first time, I gave up the idea and ended up in the ministry instead. But I was always intrigued. I think it's because I watched so much Perry Mason. You don't remember Perry Mason unless you remember Perry Mason? Okay. At any rate, I didn't understand the legal world until many years later. I was invited to preach somewhere, and I got on an airplane, and I sat next to a lawyer. And I said to him, I don't understand how you could, he was a defense attorney, I don't understand how you could defend somebody if you thought they were guilty. You ever defend anybody that you think is guilty? Oh, yeah. Well, how could you defend that person? That just didn't register with me. And he said to me, you don't understand the legal system. I said, okay, explain it to me. He said, everybody has the right to a defense. And you know what? I said, oh yeah, that's not a bad idea exactly. Our country's based on that. A lot of places in the world, you don't have the protections that we do. That's a good idea. But I also think it gets carried too far. That when you get to the place where you're more interested in getting this person off by hook or crook, pardon the phrase, but I thought it fit, then it doesn't matter what you say, just so you get them off on a technicality or something. We're no longer about justice. We're about getting the guy off, and so the system gets corrupted. I do have one more world. In fact, I got two more. I'll tell you one later. But how about the commercial world? Buy and sell. You see that in the paper on every section. In every section, it's called ads. And so what they're really trying to get you to do is buy something. So the issue in what I'm calling the commercial world is possessions. Got to have things. So we got to appeal to you so you will buy things. So that is the world. Shall we review? You got it? Where did we start? Political world. What's the word? Power. Next was the business world. What's the word? Profit. Money. Same thing. What's the sports world? Winning. What's the entertainment world? Pleasure. How about the legal world? You have a right. I didn't make that real clear. And the academic world? Pride. And the commercial world? Possessions. Now, with that in mind, look at 1 John chapter 2. And look at verse 16. In verse 15, he says, don't love the world. In verse 16, he says, all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. So in John 17, Jesus says we are not of the world, neither me nor my followers, those who've believed in me. But John describes what that means. And if you want to know what is of the world, he tells you. It's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that the word lust here isn't talking about sex, necessarily. It could. The word simply means desire. So the first thing you desire is the lust of the flesh. And that's probably talking about your body. You want some kind of pleasure. And that could involve sex, but it could involve much more. Could include all kinds of pleasure. I want comfort. I want convenience. I don't want to have to do a whole lot that's going to make me uncomfortable. But most who come to this phrase say it's a desire for pleasure. What world was that? When we went through the newspaper, what world was that? The entertainment world. Right. All right. That's interesting. Huh. All right. Let's look at the next. The lust of the eye. The desire of the eye. What's that? Well, it's what you desire, what the eye sees. So all that come to this they walk away saying, that's possessions. I want what I see. And some have big ticket items, some have little ticket items, some just hoard stuff. But I got to have things in my life. It could be clothes, it could be cars, it could be houses, it could be money, it could be, I want. Of course, if you go too far, that becomes greed. Then there is the pride of life. Pride. By the way, what did we say was the world of the... back up. The one about the lust of the eye, possessions. What did I say that was? The commercial world. All right, let's go to the pride of life. And that is, I suggested, the academic world. But actually, this could be the pride of possessions. It could be the pride of position. It could be just the pride of my profession. So that John says, love not the world, nor the things in the world, because if you love those things, the love of the Father is not in you, and then he lays it out. And if you want to know very specifically what that's like, read the daily newspaper. There it all is. Don't throw it, just read it. I dropped it. You just read the power, possessions, all those ads, the pride, the pleasure, the pride, the possessions. That is what is in the world. Oh, now wait a minute. What's wrong with that? Anything wrong with power? Somebody's got to be in a position of power. Anything wrong with owning stuff? No. And then what's the danger? What's the problem? You're in the world. This is of the world, and we're being warned about not to be of the world. So what's the problem? You got to do some of this stuff to exist in the world. So what's the problem? Verse 15. Don't love the world. It's the loving of the world that is the problem. Because why? And this is very important. The essence of the world system that John is talking about is not just pleasure and possessions and pride and power. It's the love of those things, go one step further, that leaves God out. That's the issue. So if you love these things, the love for the Father is not in you. So what he's saying is, that's the danger. It's that you will leave God out of your life. Now I can just imagine somebody saying, you left out a world. I left out several. I didn't mention the underworld. We could talk about that one. But even if you just followed the paper, there's the religious world. When I came to Los Angeles The Los Angeles Times used to have a religious section. No more. Haven't seen it for years. Not a religious section, or half a page. So what you're going to tell us is we need to be in the religious world, right? Wrong. Now, this is a very important point. How am I describing the world? It's a system that leaves God out. The political world leaves God out. The business world leaves God out. The sports world leaves God out. The entertainment world leaves God out. The academic world, they don't have any need for God. You can function very well in those worlds and not have any need for God. But if you're in the religious world, then you got to have God, right? Oh no. Religious world leaves God out. Remember that passage in the book of Revelation where Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. Any man who hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in. Stand before him is the meaning of the verse. The church shut him out. That's talking about the church. And it doesn't say Jesus will come into you, as in one word, into, as most people read the verse. Look at any translation. It'll say in, one word, to, next word. In other words, you've shut me out of the church, and if you open the door of the church, I'll come inside the church and we'll have dinner together. That's the point of the verse. I want to have fellowship with you, and you've locked me out. So the religious world is just as bad as the political world, the business world, the sports world, the legal world, the academic world, the scientific world, and the underworld, because they sometimes leave God out too and oppose him as does the world. Matter of fact, a number of years ago, there was a fellow that lived near here, and he'd grown up in church on the East Coast and had come out here, had gotten married, and had really not gone to church. So he dropped out of church. And I don't know what happened, but he decided that he was going to go back to church. And it was Easter. So he picked a church and decided that is not it. And the next Sunday, I think he was going to churches down this road here, Lindley Avenue. I think he was picking churches. And he just picked us at random. And he came in, and he told me the story, and he and his wife and son were here for years until they moved. But what he told me was, I went to this church, it was Easter, and they did not mention the resurrection of Jesus Christ one single time. Didn't shock me. Matter of fact, to appreciate what I'm talking about at this point of the religious world leaving God out, all you have to do is watch religious television. And they might mention him, but they misrepresent him all over the place. And I don't know what God they're talking about. They're certainly not talking about the God of the Bible. So you got to be careful of the religious world. So I'm saying don't love the world. Any of those worlds I've mentioned. So, in the sports world, it's easy to love the power of winning. In the business world, it's easy to fall in love with the profit. In the political world, it's easy to become obsessed with power. In the legal world, the passion is to become a defender of some people, even if they're guilty. In the scientific world, you get caught up with the scientific method that can forget there's a God. In the entertainment world, you love the spotlight. In the commercial world, you live and love for possessions. So the problem is leaving God out. The sports world leaves God out. Now, I need to clarify. Some athletes honor the Lord, right? There's some outstanding examples of that. But as a world, there is no need for God in the sports world. That is what I'm saying. The business world leaves God out. Some people in the business world know the Lord, But the business world leaves God out because all that matters to them is profit. Let me give you a current illustration. Instead of being concerned about people, which if you knew the Lord, that would be a concern. Some businesses now lay off people. They shut down that department. Those people that have worked for 15, 20 years, they are now laid off. And then they go hire people that they can pay less money to. Now that is a perfect illustration of leaving God out and living for and loving profit and not people. That's the problem with loving the world. Some in the political world know the Lord. They can follow the Lord. They're examples of that. And it's also true in all the other worlds, the legal world, the scientific community. But that's not what those worlds are about. So you can be, and this is the point, in the world and love it. Be of it. Be focused and dedicated to possessions, pleasure, power, pride, spotlight. And that is the danger of being in the world, that you become like the world. In Romans chapter 12, Paul lists a second danger. You know the passage. He says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, and be not conformed to this world. So the first danger of being in the world is that you love it. You get a taste of it and you love it. And once you fall in love with it, you become like it. You ever heard it said of a couple that have been married 50 years, they look like each other? You know? It's true. They begin to act like each other. They talk like each other. You become like the person you love. So when you love the world, you become like the world instead of being transformed by the renewing of your mind and becoming conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. And that is the problem. You see, if you get in the world and you get absorbed by the world, let's take the sports world, for example, then that becomes the be-all to end-all. Somebody has said winning is not everything, it's the only thing. That's when you know you've crossed the line and you love the world and are being conformed to it. You can't live like that and honor the Lord at the same time. In the business world, you can make money. Nothing wrong with that. You got to have it to live. But if you are in the business world to make money and in the process you misrepresent truth and hurt people, you've crossed the line. Because Jesus is full of grace and truth. So we are to be conformed to Him. We're to live according to truth and not misrepresent the facts. And we're to be concerned about people and love them. So if you become so obsessed and absorbed with the business world that you're misrepresenting the truth and hurting people, you have crossed the line. And that's the danger of being in the world. There's nothing wrong with laughter. As a matter of fact, the book of Proverbs says it's good medicine. I recommend you laugh. I love good jokes. You've heard me tell a few. But humor can hurt. Now you've crossed the line. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul says you should avoid coarse jesting. Now the Lord used humor. You strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. That's funny, folks. I was in seminary. I had to write a master's thesis, and I wrote my master's thesis on Christ's use of illustrations. And in the course of doing that, I discovered Christ was funny. Sometimes it was just plain hilarious. But in order to demonstrate that, I had to look into what makes something funny. And one of the theories of humor is that it's anything that's incongruous. So you know the cartoon figure that's all head and got two little bitty legs? That's funny by definition. It's incongruous. It's all out of proportion. And that's the kind of humor Jesus used. So that you strain at a gnat and you swallow a camel. That's hilarious. Can you envision that? The other theory of humor, by the way, is somebody has to get hurt. And that's why comedians know that if you really want to have a good line, you take on people of power. It's easy to poke at the president if you're a late night comedian. But the point is, there's nothing wrong with humor until that humor crosses the line and it starts to hurt people. So Paul says, don't be conformed, or as one translation gave it, don't be poured into that mold of the world. And by the way, the word world in Romans 12:2 is not the same Greek word as the word cosmos. It's a different word for world. That word means age. It's what the current version of the world is. Now, all ladies will recognize that immediately. The fashion world, I didn't get into that one, changes every year. For men and women, I might add. I discovered that years ago with the width of the tie. One year, it's real thin. So you buy all these thin ties. Ties last forever. You know, I got ties that are going to last me for the rest of my life. And the next year they say, whoops, that's out of style. You got to have the wide tie. So you stock up on those for a few years and they say, whoops, it's not the thin tie, it's not the wide tie, it's the medium-sized width tie. They keep changing it. That's the idea behind the word world in Romans 12:2. It's the age. It's the current age. I'm being like the current age. Now, I don't think I have to teach this congregation. What world should we be concerned about? You're looking at me with a blank stare. The spiritual world. And who is in the spiritual world? Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So turn to one more verse, and I'm almost done. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. This is one of the most important verses on the spiritual life in all of the Bible. 2 Corinthians 3:18. But we all, with an unveiled face, behold as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, and we are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory by the Spirit of God. That's the world we ought to fall in love with. That's the world we ought to be conformed to. We're being conformed to Christ, and here's how it's done. You look at the Word of God, you see the person of Jesus Christ, you focus on Him, you say, I want to be like that, and that's what you do, and as you do and follow through, the Spirit of God transforms you into Christ-likeness. By the way, the word transform only appears twice in the New Testament, once in this verse and once in Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And the mind in verse 2 of Romans 12 is the mind spelled out in 2 Corinthians 3:18. It's focusing on the Lord. It's thinking about Him until you get to the place that you can say with the Apostle Paul, I have the mind of Christ. I think like He does. I like to say, think biblically. And we don't think biblically. We think like the world. We think, I need to look good. I'm not saying you should look bad. But when that becomes your focus and that becomes your concern and that's what you're most concerned about, Instead of being good and doing good, you have fallen in love with the world. By the way, I want to give you an illustration of thinking like Christ, or thinking biblically. I started out as a youth speaker. So I had a sermon on thou shalt not commit adultery. Is that a good thing to teach young people? And I had a list of arguments. Pregnancy, disease. You know, I had a whale of a sermon. And then one day it dawned on me, none of that's biblical. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't say that to young people. You should. That's all true. But it's not the way the Bible thinks. How does the Bible think? Why should you not do that? One reason, and one reason only, is all that's given in the Bible. Because the Lord said don't do it. Now you see, if you use all those other arguments, you can figure out how to get around them. Matter of fact, that's what they teach in school these days. They don't teach don't do it, they teach you how to get around it. So you have protection and you don't have those consequences. So that's the problem with saying don't do it for all those reasons. But if the reason is the Lord said don't do it, you can't get around that one. And that's the difference between thinking like the world and thinking like the Word. Amen. Isn't that interesting? Think biblically so you can be like Christ. I'm not quite done, but I'm almost there. What am I saying? You're in the world. Don't be of the world, which means that you're going to start thinking like the world, you're going to fall in love with the world, and you're going to become like the world. In that, you're going to start living for pleasure, power, possessions, position, all the things we've talked about. Please do not misunderstand me. What I've said could be misunderstood. So let me clarify. There is nothing wrong with winning. Did I make that clear? There is nothing wrong with making money. Is that clear? There is nothing wrong with having possessions. There's nothing wrong with being in a position of power. Matter of fact, we're in the world, and you have to have some of that to operate in the world. At the same time, God has a set of principles that we are to abide by, whether we win or not, whether we make money or not, whether we are comfortable or not. And that's being in love with the Lord and not the world. Then those things don't become as important when you have Him and are in love with Him. So the things of the world become strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. So, we're going to end the service, have lunch together, and send you into the world. Just be careful, it's dangerous out there. Don't love it and be conformed to it, but love Him and be conformed to Him. Years ago, I was directing a tour, and part of the tour was to be in the country of Turkey. When I was there, I was in Turkey. And I found out some things about Turkey. It is a almost totally Muslim country. When I was there, I was told they had 30 million people in the country and 30 Christians. I think they were talking about evangelicals because there is an Orthodox group, and I think there's a little more than 30, but not many. The Orthodox Church has their headquarters there, and I think they have a few people, but it's a Muslim country. So let me tell you what is not in that country. Any talk about Jesus. They don't pray to Him or in His name before they eat. The whole country has left out the Bible and the Lord. They do not thank Him for their food. They do not consider Him when they spend their money. They do not believe in Him. They have nothing to do with Him. They have reduced Him to a prophet. So, I was in that world, but I was not of that world. Because I did not conform to their practices and procedures. I stayed conformed to the biblical concepts. Now, it's easy to see that one because we're not Muslim. But you see, the same thing in principle happens in the United States. You can be in the United States, be in it, but not of it. And that is what the Scripture is after. That was the prayer of the Lord. That you be in it. He wants you to be in it. He wants you to win people in it. He wants you to witness in it. He wants you to be a reflection of Him in it. He just doesn't want you to adopt all their practices and their objectives and their goals and their ambitions. He wants your ambition to be to love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself.